I'll call to the Town of Old Saybrook Zoning Commission meeting together for the regular agenda and the hybrid meeting for Monday, October 2nd, 7 p.m. Town Hall first floor conference room. Roll call, me, Mark Caldarella, Bob Freeman, who's online, regular commission member, Mark Delmonico. Seated tonight for Jerry Lewis is John Henry, and seated for Ian Marie Thorsten is Brenda Dyson. We also have our ZEO officer, Chris Costa, and our clerk, Joanne Galley. Nobody in the audience.
Nobody online.
And nobody online. So move on to regular business, the minutes. Make a motion to accept the minutes from our regular meeting of Monday, September 18th. Is there a second? Second by Mark Delmonico. Any discussion, changes, updates? I did not see any. Anyone have any? No. Not having any, seeing any. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions. Thank you, Joanne, for another job well done. Any correspondence other than what's
Just
tonight?
pick it up for staff
Okay.
report.
All right, moving on to old business. A workshop drive-through windows as an accessory use for financial institutions, pharmacies, indoor restaurants, or other food and beverage establishments. Section 53, moratorium ends December 1st, 2023. Chris, would you like to bring us up to date on anything relative to that?
I don't really think there's much to update on. We have the last version of the text. I put together 2 meetings ago, kind of a list of the history of the zoning regulation changes. You have all kinds of input from our engineer, and a number of other exhibits and things over the past almost year now, potentially. And I think we were kind of at a point 2 meetings ago, I wasn't at the last meeting, where we were stuck. The commission was somewhere split, or I'm not really sure. So I guess we need to start digging into the text, and I'm looking for guidance on the commission and what the next steps are.
The notices went out about the extension for the moratorium, correct?
So the moratorium has been advertised, and that hearing next meeting in November. October 16th
To vote on that.
to vote on that, so.
Correct. And so far, what we've seen is come back is that everybody that has responded is in agreement to the extension.
So at this point, we can't talk about it.
Oh,
since
sorry.
It's it's another text amendment in a
Okay.
public hearing, but
Okay, scratch that.
we'll talk about that on the 16th.
All right. So where are we as a commission in terms of, has everybody had the time to look at the materials that Chris has provided us in the history over the past years? And is there I guess we have a couple ways we can go. We can go with what has been drafted up to this point for drive-throughs, which affect all 3 of them, or we can go back to the moratorium, or not the moratorium, we can go back to no drive-throughs, or we can modify the existing regulations. I think you've heard my concerns relative to the extent of the document, how difficult it may be to manage, and also my concern of the number of drive-throughs that would be available to be built in town based on what we've written. So I think we need to hear from each commissioner relative to what their thought process is. I think we, obviously we want to move this forward and complete it as an earlier date as possible, that time allows. But I think we're at that point where we really have to decide what is it that we want and what direction to go in. Bob, do you have any comments you'd like?
Yeah, as I said at an earlier meeting, referencing the Goldman and York consultant deal about uniformity clause. In particular, they were talking about separation distance. I don't have a problem with the statutory legality of separation distances, because we have found that East Lyme has a separation distance, and Somers has a separation distance in their zoning regs. We have separation distances in our regulations already. And most recently, with regard to a gas station regulation change, the separation distance was changed, but still preserved. And so I think separation distances are viable today. At some point in the future, that may change. And in preparation for that, with regard to what I believe the Commission's intent is regulating drive-through restaurants, is to have public health and safety as a primary concern regarding site design and layout, and that would preclude some lots from achieving specified requirements for stacking spaces, and the default is a separation distance. But if you don't call it that, then it's use-specific regulations regarding on-site safety of vehicles moving. So I looked things over, and considering we have a Dunkin' drive-through and we have a McDonald's drive-through that are separated by 1,000 feet, that works for me. And even farther away is the Burger King drive-through. And the Burger King building is located, according to Google Maps measuring tool, about 160 feet from the street line. And to me, that says 20 feet per stacking space. That's eight stacking spaces. And so with Burger King as, to me, the preferred layout design for drive-through windows at a food indoor restaurant, 8 spaces, stacking spaces between the street line and the front of the building would achieve a number of things. It would, without saying so, require a certain lot depth. The building would come after 160 feet, and then there would be the aisle that would eventually lead to the drive-through window, and there may well be 2 aisles, the aisle and a passing aisle. Then there would be a perimeter landscape. There would be building setback, which might already be met by those 1 or 2 aisles, followed by perimeter landscape buffer. And so the depth of the lot is now a couple of hundred feet. It's not 400 feet like an auto dealership requirement, but there's a separate specification regarding lot shape for a particular use. And that has been in place for as long as I've been on the commission. So you can choose to have a specified lot depth for a particular use. But I think in the case of a drive-through restaurant, simply using a model of one that works without spilling vehicles onto the public thoroughfare, that Burger King is an okay example. It should be a single lane drive-through window stacking space of not less than 8 vehicles from street line to the front of the building, and then the building length and the drive-through access aisle 1 or 2 to a single drive-through window in that one building on that lot. That would establish a safer layout than we have experienced at Dunkin'. On Saturday at 3:30 p.m., there were 13 cars in line at Dunkin', and the last one was at the sidewalk. And so the standard that we have referenced in the draft regulations for drive-through for food for restaurants, I think I saw 14. So 14 wouldn't solve the problem. Uh, it needs to be more, in my opinion. But if you have 8 before you get to the building, and the drive-through window is on the rear of the building compared to the street line, or on the wall least visible from public roads, which might be 3/4 of the way around the building, then you would end up with more than 14 spaces, and that would be safer than the existing Dunkin' drive-through. So those are my positions on site design and layout, and separation distance and lot dimensions as delimiting factors. It's a public health and safety issue that's relevant and highly related to the specific use of having a drive-through window for a food and beverage establishment. Do we need the same stacking spaces for financial institutions and pharmacies? No. The ones we have in the draft, I'm okay with those. But the requirement to have 2 stacking spaces after the drive-through window is not so important if you have to have 8 between the street line and the building, unless the drive-through window exits to a different street, and then maybe you still have to have 2 stacking spaces after the window. Looking through the rest of our regulations, there is a regulation, I can't put my finger on it at the moment, but says access roads should not be between the building and the street in pedestrian nodes. Most of the B4 is pedestrian node. And as an example of an access aisle that really discourages pedestrian use of the sidewalk to building walkway, which is required in our regulations, is Dunkin'. The exit access aisle goes between the building and the street, very close to the street. And yeah, there's probably more time to go between cars on the exit lane than there is on the entrance lane, but the access lane should not be between the building and the street. That's one. The access lane is supposed to have maximal visibility when you get to the street. That's already in our regulation. So we have some good stuff already, but I think we need to be specific about limitations of 1 drive-through window plus its secondary per building, and 1 drive-through window per lot. And with a stacking space from the street requirement, that we get much more workable things like Burger King than Dunkin'. Separation of 1,000 feet works for me. From Dunkin' to McDonald's, I don't feel the need that Old Saybrook has to put more drive-throughs closer together than that. We already have, by my count, not too long ago, 43 places in Old Saybrook to sit down and eat food, restaurants, indoor restaurants. I didn't count Dairy Queen, for example. But with that in mind, the regulation to permit drive-through windows at indoor restaurants, not outdoor, just indoor restaurants in the B4 district, would create additional competition for the restaurants that we already have, especially those that serve sandwiches. We're not talking about fancy sit-down linen tablecloth restaurants here. We're talking drive-through fare. And yes, it's popular. Yes, people in cars like that. But someone made a statement it would bring new business to Old Saybrook. I don't see it that way. I think it will bring more vehicles to Old Saybrook, and people may never get out of their cars, simply pick up the food and drive away. And the only business that benefits from that is the drive-through window business. So bringing business to Old Saybrook is a red herring. I give no value to that statement. And if it cuts away from the customer going to existing mostly sandwich places, granted, but then it would be detrimental to the businesses that are already here. And so I heard Mark Caldarella mention that if we've created a monster by allowing drive-throughs in B4 without all the additional regulations that it would entail, then perhaps we could go back to disallowing drive-through windows at indoor food and beverage places in the B4 district. It takes away, it takes away from the current issue, but I think they'd be back. Drive-through businesses post-COVID they're busier because people avoid contact with other people. And yes, it's part of our culture now, but is that what we want for the future of Old Saybrook? So those are my comments. I have particular comments about the wording, but that could be ironed out, after this discussion.
So you're okay?
Anyone else? Anyone else?
Foot setback, correct? Bob?
Yes.
1,000-foot distance.
Yes.
Separation.
Separation distance.
Separation.
And I'm not sure if I understood your stacking. Right now we have it in as 14 with 2 after. Are you saying that it should be more or less?
No, 14 works, but 8 of them should be between the street line at where the curb cut is and the front of the building that has the drive-through window. And so that you're going to likely end up with more than 14, but 8 should be located in such a way that the building is pushed back from the street line in the B4 pedestrian node district.
Okay. So that would be something that we would have to add to restaurant drive-throughs versus where we are right now.
I'm just gonna take
Right,
notes and see how
right.
that'll.
Hey, Bob, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Bob, in the case of McDonald's, there's a side entrance there. And how would you perceive that to fit into your plan, which I like, by the way, in terms of 8 before the building? Or that just doesn't work?
Wait, what's the concern?
Well, in the case of McDonald's, there's an entrance from I'll call it the front of the building on Route 1, but there's also a side entrance. So you can sneak into the middle of the restaurant's too close to the side. It doesn't work with what you said. So would that be something you disallow? You follow me?
Well, I'm based in what I'm talking about on observations of what works better than what doesn't work so well. So I think my approach would lead to better public health and safety on-site traffic stuff. My objective is to make all the traffic regarding a drive-through window be the issue that has to be dealt with on-site so that we don't get any spillover onto public roads. In our case, Route 1 mostly.
So having a side entrance like we do at McDonald's, it spills into the road. Right. So we wouldn't allow for a side entrance. That may be.
Yeah. And that suggestion that Bob made kind of addresses what Jeff Jacobson pointed out, that by our specification, 750 feet. But he did
The lot size.
the mock-up of the lot size. And by our specification, the lot has to be 140,000 square feet. Because of what we specified for setback and side clearance and everything,
The setback, yeah. What was the number on the setback? See, I'm trying to avoid different setbacks for different uses. In this case, it would function better if you could do it that way. But my concern is that creating specific site-specific requirements for one type of use could be construed as arbitrary and capricious, and it would be thrown out in court. And so site layout is part of what we can regulate. And for a use, we can specify aspects of the use that result in different regulations for that specific use. We have different parking regulations for different uses. This is a different site layout stacking space regulation for drive-through windows. And I don't see a problem with that. But to say that a business with a drive-through window has to have a bigger lot and a different setback is a little sketchy in terms of we're supposed to be regulating the land and the uses. And if you tie the layout to the use, then a building could be anywhere, but if a building is 10 feet off the street in the pedestrian node and somebody wants to turn it into a drive-through, the answer is no, because you don't meet the regulations. And there's no hardship for that. You can't provide what's required. And I think it's different from saying that your lot has to be 40 or 80,000 square feet and you only have 28,000 square feet. I mean, the Burger King lot is well over 1 acre, but it's not 2 acres. And so I think the Burger King drive-through window situation actually works. And if you were to, again, keeping a separation distance from one lot to the next lot with a drive-through window, one drive-through window on any lot, that precludes getting a whole bunch of drive-throughs one after another, no matter what the lot size is.
So I guess my
Go
question.
ahead.
So John was pointing out that Jeff's comment that if you take the minimum width of the lot of 350 feet and multiply it by the 400, you end up with 140,000 square foot lot.
Right.
In a district that allows for the drive-through on a 90,000 square foot lot. So the question is, if we were going to eliminate either the frontage requirement or the depth requirement, we'd have to either change, remove, and change it so that the 350 change the 90,000 to 140,000. So which would you want to do?
Right. So all right. So you don't have to. This doesn't have to be an either or, because if you put both in and one of them falls because it's arbitrary and capricious and it's not uniform across the district, then the other one still stands. So at this point, I would say put them both in.
Okay.
I just think the 8-foot space from the street
It's
is not necessarily a good requirement. You could have it go back, you can forward. The building could be up front, but you could have your lanes go further back and whatnot. So I think just putting the 14 spaces in of itself constitutes or meets what we want to do. It's forcing them to do it. Just to say 8 from the street line, what if the building is up close to the street, but the stacking lanes go way behind and come up? Well, just to restrict it, that's a further restriction that I think you're covering by doing the 14 space requirement.
Well, I said street line because I had Burger King in mind. But if it's 8 stacking spaces from the curb cut to the building, the entrance curb cut to the building, then it moves the building away from the street.
Right. And that's part of the design by doing that, is to move it as far back as possible.
So I guess I'm going to go back to a different version of the regulation. Remember, at one point we had a regulation that said you have to have X amount of spaces before the window, the order window, X amount of spaces between the order window and the pickup window. I mean, are we getting back into that? I mean, maybe Bob's suggestion of putting more than 14, that might eliminate it.
So we increase it from 14 to a higher number versus doing what Bob is suggesting, of saying 8 stacking spaces between the curb of the street and the front of the building.
I think you'll get more than 14 if that's the case.
Right.
So I think, I mean, the other thing too is from the design perspective, and initially when we started this and we met with the folks from the drive-through, why would you want to put 8 spaces between the menu board or you know, a bunch between the menu board and the pickup window when they're trying to promote rapid service and get people through there? Because some of these drive-throughs are actually have a time limit and telling people, okay, you met the time limit and move forward. They're not going to want to have a huge stack between drive-through, pickup and order.
But
Well,
the bottom-
that's their problem. That's not a zoning matter. That's a business efficiency problem that I'm sure they'll be able to figure out. It may not be the favored one, the easy one, or the best one, but that's not a zoning issue.
I'm just bringing it up because we went through and we regulated it so much in one of the versions. Then we said, now we're designing and we're regulating, but I can put text in there for the 8. So I put a note. So we're all set.
But the bottom point for the public health and safety, that it doesn't back up onto Route 1 or another road, that's the design purpose of doing 8 prior to that. Okay, so
Right.
14 becomes a higher number, but it controls it. I mean, we've all gone by Dunkin' Donuts when they're back out in the street.
Well, Bob was just saying that there was 13 and they were up to the sidewalk. So 14 really isn't going to make much of a difference.
No, one more is not gonna make a difference there
So that number would be the number that would need to be increased
for 14. Yeah.
and then put the 8.
Well, if you had 8 up to the corner of the building, you're more than likely, and I have to calculate this out, but more than likely, you're gonna have more than 6 spaces or 8 spaces after that point.
Right. The length of the building, if it's 100 feet, that's 5 stacking spaces. If it's only 40 feet, if the length of the building on that side's only 40 feet, that's only 2 stacking spaces. So you're up to 10. And so again, if you still keep the requirement of 14 stacking spaces for a drive-through window in a pedestrian node in the B4 district, and 8 of them are between the curb cut and the building, they only have to have 6 more spaces before the window. And if the window is just around, if you got a 2 stacking space length building, 40 feet, and you turn the corner and the window is right there after 1 more stacking space, you're only up to 11. You got to have 4 more. So you either put the building farther back, or you make your, like Burger King, you make your drive-through lane go farther back than the building before it turns around to come forward, providing more stacking space. 14 minimum, 8 between the curb cut and the front of the building.
Okay. And
I like the idea from a health and safety standpoint, too, because it keeps the cars from, exactly what we're talking about, keeps them out of the street. And it also eliminates the distance, the requirement for distances, although we can put both in. It's kind of self designs the building, or at least the lot. I like that. I know what you're saying, but this kind of forces the other aspect of it.
So what if there was a drive-through proposed, say, that was near a curb cut, but that was only the exit, and the entrance was somewhere far away, and they could have all the stacking spaces required and more on the lot, and the building for the drive-through window could still be close to a public road. See, that could work. But they're only exiting to the public road. They're not entering there. That keeps all the traffic on for the drive-through window on site. Let the site handle the drive-through traffic.
right,
But don't we end up, or couldn't we end up in a situation where you maybe you're entering from another lot. And I mean, you end up in a situation like Agway, where I don't know if you've seen, they have all kinds of signs up there now trying to direct traffic because people can't circulate through that parking lot. So do we end up in a situation, so say, and I'm just thinking of like, I'll pick on like where in Middletown, there's a Price Chopper, and then they have like a little lot, and they have a Taco Bell, and there's a bank and so forth. But what happens when maybe it's not to the curb cut? What if it stacks and blocks the aisles in the shopping center? I mean, that's the other thing I think that the commission was kind of annoyed with the whole circulation of Dunkin'. When I go to Smithland, I kind of get annoyed with it too, because you can't maneuver around because of the traffic from the drive-through. So wouldn't we need to address that for the shopping center circulation? Granted, I understand the traffic's on their lot, but wouldn't we want to encourage having a good design so people can flow through and you're not backing up or congesting potentially a shopping center?
And that's unsafe too.
Right, so the stacking spaces should be accessible from one point, the mouth, the entry to the stacking spaces. There should not be multiple entry points to the line to allow for cutting the line from the rest of the parking lot.
So maybe it's something where you talked about having from the curb cut, but it may not necessarily be the curb cut. It may be the entry to the drive-through from
Side street.
within a parking lot.
Yeah, or within the parking lot, or from a side street.
It's
Yeah,
the same issue.
It's the same issue. It should
We just-
apply, no matter where the location of the lot is, it should apply to the lot of the driveway.
All right.
Which should eliminate that, hopefully, that issue. Brenda?
Seems like the specificity of the regulation is gonna dictate the location of the building.
Just speak up so that they can hear online.
I'm sorry. The specificity of the, regulation is gonna dictate the location of the building. And the goal is for the public safety. So it seems like what we're proposing makes sense for those reasons. It's sort of,
Back into the
Yeah,
safety,
into it.
back into it by
yeah,
honoring the
We're gonna get to the goal.
regulations,
exactly.
Mhm.
We're gonna get to the goal.
and get to the goal. Enforce the 14, I don't care where they come, as long as it's 14.
Bob made a comment earlier when you first, talked about, bringing business to town. I think we have to take a look at what we're potentially going to do here relative to protecting the existing businesses that are already established in town. I see drive-throughs on off from easy access from a major thoroughfare, whether it's an interstate or a large local road, is a convenience to come in, get what you want, and leave town. I don't see where it's going to enhance the businesses in town, and I think we have to consider that as we move forward into this. I think we, as a commission, are responsible for taking a look at the environment within Old Saybrook, what it stands for, and looking to not impact negatively any of the existing restaurants that people support and come into town potentially to use. I think strictly drive-through fast food restaurants are exactly that. Get off, get in, get out, and get on your way.
And if you read the B4 Business District introductory paragraph, to go along with elsewhere, where we're supposed to lessen congestion in the streets, the objective is not to impede access to the rest of the town from the gateway B4 business district. And if you put a bunch of drive-throughs close to the road with inadequate stacking space in the B4 district, I think it's inevitable that you will have impeded access to the rest of the town. And so we're trying to find the right course here so that we can meet our objectives of lessening congestion in the streets overall and making certain that we don't impede access to the rest of the town. And as Mark is describing it, then drive-through restaurants would be in the B4 district, and most desirable to them would be close to the exit 66 in one case, but not all, and that people get off, get their drive-through food, and get back on the highway. We only have two means of getting from Westbrook to the river. You either go on I-95 or you go on Route 1.
Right.
And so that's to me, that's pretty critical, that if you're going to put everything that creates traffic and potential backups on Route 1, along Route 1, no place else to go. And that includes Mariners Way. That's still Route 1, that you impede access to the town. You could, unless you make sure that all their problems with traffic and stacking are on the site, which means the site has to be big enough to handle it. And we'll start out with one drive-through window in a food establishment, and we'll see how it works. Yes, we hear that there are places where they want multiple drive-through windows, multiple lanes, but we're not ready for that.
Okay. So where are we, I guess, as a consensus amongst ourselves, the five of us tonight, in what direction we want to go in? What we've been talking about, the current draft that we've put together over the last 10 months with some updates and modifications based on what we talked about tonight. Do we want to go back to what we originally had, which was no drive-throughs?
Well, all right,
Your restaurant.
I would say it's really simple to just go back to the way it was and disallow drive-through food stuff in the B4. But I think we've already taken a step away from that. And I think it's our responsibility to fix what we started. And I think if we submit for public hearing all of the regulations that we have proposed for drive-throughs, and maybe incorporate something that I brought up this evening, that we can go to public hearing and we can hash it out during the time period in which it's in public hearing. The only deadline that we would have to meet would be to finish new regulations by the end of the moratorium. Otherwise, we don't have a deadline because it's commission initiated.
I think 1,000 feet eliminates a lot of congestion. You're already making them spread apart. You can't have them all close all at once. They're 1,000 feet apart. Make it 1,500 feet apart, further further. But I'm just saying that's you're forcing them. You're not putting them close together.
Right. Right. And you're okay with the 14 stacking?
I think
With 8 up
Yeah.
to the front?
Yes, I think, yeah, as a special exception application, I think the commission could insist on a layout for new construction or a blank sheet. I think the commission could make it so that there's no congestion in the streets caused by the drive-through window, because we know how that happens.
Right.
That's new construction on the plan.
New construction, not-
That forces you to do, yeah.
Right, right. Is 1,000 foot adequate?
I think it's pretty good. Like Bob said, it's from McDonald's to Burger King and
So that's a waste.
it's a ways.
You can't fit a half a dozen up there. You can't fit just can't do it.
Well, you're also going through the B two though.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason there's that gap. It's not.
Right. John, Brenda?
That makes sense.
And essentially, we all agree with what you said, Mark, about controlling what can happen here. So we don't end up with drive-through. A couple of these criteria do that, 1,000 foot being one of them. And then the next thing is the safety of a particular site. And that's why I like Bob's idea, it pushes everything away from the street. So those two, kind of cornerstones help control this a lot.
And we're okay with staying with the 350 foot frontage and the 400 foot depth? Yep. Okay. Are we okay with what we've prepared for financial institutions and pharmacies? Is there any? I think they're fine. I don't see any reason to
Go crazy on
go
those.
crazy on those.
No.
But Chris, do you want to take it at this point?
So the one thing, and I can email the commission members that are not here. I don't know if you have any edits. So we really haven't gone line by line.
No, we
And a few
No.
meetings ago, we decided not to go line by line because it was too painful. So if you could email me, any of the edits you have with the text. And then I'll email the absent commission members, see if they have any edits. I'll try to get that together, and then I haven't sent it to Matt Willis for legal review because we've been
Right.
all over the place at times. And then I'll try to get something for your next meeting for you to take a look at. It's hopefully a final, but just remember that for me, I have to do this all in a week to get it in your packet,
Right.
which would be ready next Monday. So I'll try my best, but I need responses pretty quickly.
Very quickly. So we would hope to be able to have something and go to a public hearing relatively.
If
Sooner than
everyone
later,
can
if everybody-
agree on the 16th to go forward with the draft, granted, we can always wordsmith it. I just want to make sure, might as well just get as many edits in at this point.
Did you want to edit this based on what we talked about tonight? Is there anything that we need to do and get that one out? Or
Well-
are we gonna work with the one that we have? That's stated,
Well, I
811.
mean, we discussed, I think everybody agreed with the whole 8 curb cut or 8 spaces
Yeah.
for the curb cut or the entry. I think we kind of talked about maybe discouraging second entryways
Yep.
into drive-throughs. We talked about keeping the 350 and 400,000. And the 140,000 square feet despite the conflict. I guess what we could do, if we're that close with it, if the board can get me edits, as far as typos and anything, do you want to look at this again, or? I could go through and try to finalize the text, and then we go to public hearing, like Bob said. There's really no timeline other than the end of the moratorium.
Right.
But do you want one last kind of crack at finishing the few things we discussed tonight?
I think the couple things that we discussed tonight should be added in here so that commissioners that are not here have
Yeah,
a
complete
current-
that and send that out. And
send it out, and we all comment on that in a relatively short window,
Mhm.
all right, and get it back to you, and then go from there.
Is that possible?
Is that,
That's what I'm gonna try to do and then get it to Matt.
Yeah.
So you want one last look at it before I schedule the hearing, is
Yeah.
that's, or do you want me to go with it? I mean, I could go with it, advertise it, but then you won't be able to talk about it till you open the public hearing. If there's something in it you don't like and it gets referred out, that's my concern.
I'd like you to update it. My thought is I'd like you to update it and give us one more shot.
Okay,
And then give our comments back and corrections or edits or anything like that, and then go from there. That's my feeling.
I agree.
Everybody agree?
Yep.
and I mean, you can either just kind of, if you have markups like
Right,
this,
you can
you
do-
can just scan it, or if you wanna
Yeah.
just.
Yeah.
We'll go from there and I'll try to flip it over and get it to Matt and we'll go from there, Bob's.
Bob's got his.
Oh, one more thing, in the section 9 definitions, there's a proposed change to restaurant full service that's underlined, meaning new. I don't like that at all, that the full service restaurant may have an outdoor restaurant component. That's apples and oranges. You can
That's
have
an
a full, you can have one, you can have the other, you could have both, but I don't think you need to say that the full service indoor restaurant can have an outdoor restaurant component.
So that's
That-
that's an existing reg, Bob. And the full
Yeah,
service restaurant with the outdoor, I crossed it out because I think that came up before.
Yes.
Why would a full service restaurant that's indoor have an outdoor component? If it's
it can
not,
it can have outdoor seating. I have no problem with that. But a full service restaurant should not be in the definition section saying that a full service restaurant may have an outdoor restaurant component. Those are two different things. The full service restaurant can have outdoor seating, but outdoor seating at a full service restaurant that's an indoor restaurant doesn't necessarily comply with what is an outdoor restaurant. That's in the same definition earlier. And I think they're two different things, and they don't say one. And I think that one should not be said, it should not be said that one can have the other as a component. That's what the underlined part says. The full service restaurant may have outdoor seating, that's fine. But it should not say that a full service restaurant may have an outdoor restaurant component. Two different things.
I think that had to do when we had a petition for an outdoor restaurant with portable trailers. I think that's where that all came in. So are you
Right.
saying,
Well, it's underlined, and that means that in this document, it's proposed as new text. And I would recommend taking out that which is underlined.
it's not.
If you don't do it
underlined.
now, I'll bring it up during the public hearing.
It's strike through.
The strike through, not underlined, Bob.
It's strike through.
Let me see. I will look.
Unless you're on a track doc or track changes or something
Yeah.
came up, that
On
could be.
the printed version, it's a strike through.
All
So
right, well,
the proposal was to remove the full service restaurant may have an outdoor component in both restaurant, full service and restaurant outdoor.
oh, well, it's underlined. It's not strike through in my copy.
Wow.
I'm-
On our
they-
printed copies, it's a strike through, Bob.
That's
Is this the August 11th version?
the one with the red and the blue and the green, whichever that one. That it doesn't have the copy that I have does not have a date on it. I didn't write the date on it, so
You can get a good
sorry,
read.
but
We throw everything away and stop everything. When you send out.
Yeah, so
fun.
it's not proposed as,
No.
the one with the green was the one, I think there was a version that Dave
Yeah.
Royston had comments.
Yeah,
no, this is after Dave Royston's comments. He may have had new comments, but this is after May 15th.
All right, so I'll get you the other version, but the one is, it's strike through.
Right, okay. All right, well,
We'll
we'll
figure
deal
it
with,
out.
I'll deal with that in the future, okay.
Well, the thing is, I mean, what we can do is we'll go through, if you want, we just go through the version that you have, and then we'll do that as part of the edits and bring it back to the commission for
Okay,
the 16th.
Okay,
I figure as much as we can address now that we have issues with, this is really
yep,
the time to do it, not get back into wordsmithing for the hearing.
right,
right.
okay,
All right,
and we're clear,
I think so.
okay. Committee representative and staff reports.
All right. So just a few things, Lynette and, Sarah Makowicki from the land use office, they really worked hard and, were able to obtain silver recertification for the town in sustainable Connecticut. So
Good.
they did a great job, and pretty much it's a little tricky because all the town departments are supposed to be working on it, but they patched it together, so to speak. So, just so if you see them, they really did a great job. We've just been busy, as you know, permits are still coming in, things are steady. And then the only other thing that I didn't put it on the agenda, but I thought I would bring up under staff report, is you do have a memo from the zoning board of appeals relating to recent issues with rooftop decks. And that was dated August 24th. I know that you had it at your last meeting. Unfortunately, I could not be here. So you continued the discussion. So I'm here if you would like to
Have a discussion.
review this. Yeah. So, I mean, the main thing is that there's some of the language that to keep it the way that it is, I personally think we need to strengthen it up if that's what you intend to do. The zoning board of appeals, we did have a workshop to discuss story, half story, rooftop decks, how the regulation is applied. And at that workshop and what is summarized in the memo is that the zoning board of appeals thinks that the zoning commission should consider allowing rooftop decks and balconies off of second floors as more of a design feature. We've had some interesting rooftop decks that have come through to the zoning board of appeals. Some of them with the 30 feet in the air is where you're putting your feet, where you've got someone on a non-conforming lot next door and their little 4,000 square foot lot with their one-story bungalow with neighbors coming out that weren't necessarily too pleased about having a 35-foot, high structure by the time you end up with railings and so forth, and having people kind of loom down. The zoning board of appeals in our workshop, we talked about a little bit about, New England architecture, and, the New England does have widows' walks and other types of similar features to New England architecture. And the one thing that has really been an issue, and I guess I should give you some back history, is that when one of the first rooftop decks came through and I was asked to cite a section of the regulations to vary, there's really no section of the regulation that says rooftop decks, just like there's not a section of the regulation that says hot tubs are allowed as an accessory use. The zoning regulations, as we all know, we can't write down every possible use and accessory use or architectural element, or our 300, and I think we're at almost 80 pages right now, would be larger than a printed version of the Encyclopedia Britannica. So the zoning board of appeals, the first rooftop deck that did get a little bit controversial at the time, the applicant went through and went for a definition of, a variance of the regulation, the definition of half story, because that's really the only place in the regulations that talks about not allowing exterior doors and balconies. And what happened was that application did get a little bit controversial, and Mike Cronin came in for a discussion with the commission, and he said, well, you can't vary a definition, so you need to amend the regulation. So my kind of go-to, and I think the commission's go-to over the years, has been section 6.1, where section 6.1 says, to assist in the interpretation of permitted uses, certain uses are listed as prohibited in a district, even though the listing of uses prohibited is not intended to be exhaustive. Any use not specified as permitted in the district is prohibited. So that was the regulation that was cited for the variance, but then there was some discussion, well, a rooftop deck is not a use, it's an architectural element. There's been, I mean, this thing has been picked apart at one point, and I believe I did copy this commission on the memo clarifying that 6.1 is what we've used for, uses, and that the zoning commission, I know I at least talked to Bob when he was the chairman, and in my 23 years here, the zoning commission has always prohibited rooftop decks off of half stories. Yes, I do understand that there's some that went through for variances and other reasons that they got there. But this commission's taken a consistent approach to it. In some ways, I mean, I will say I can kind of understand there are situations where maybe if somebody had like a rooftop area with a little, an area that was open on a half story with a rooftop that you can go sit there and look out, not a giant party deck, that maybe, okay, that's a little bit reasonable. But some of the, we're getting some decent size rooftop decks. And the other thing with them is that if they're not off of a half story, because one of the applications, instead of having the full definition of half story, they went through and lowered the roof line so that it wasn't even a half story. It was just kind of an odd looking, in my opinion, element to the roof, and then had a flat roof off of it. There's been applications to the board with flat rooftop decks with staircases in some circumstances leading to the ground. So if the building is 35 foot high, a combination of different stairways and access ways so that you didn't have to enter through the half story. So you could just make your way through a series of decks, sometimes spiral staircases and other means to get to that rooftop deck. So I wanted to talk to the commission. I know I had mentioned it briefly before. And the ZBA, I said, I kind of got the impression, and it was a very late night that I brought it up under a staff report, that I didn't think that the board was interested, at the time of pursuing a regulation change to allow the decks. But it was also a late night, so I did talk to them, and at that workshop at another occasion, and said, well, put it in a memo, let the board discuss it, and we'll go from there. But I definitely think we need some clarification, and I haven't talked to Matt Willis. I don't necessarily agree with the interpretation of 6.1 that a deck is not a use, it's an architectural feature, but that's a whole other situation. So at a minimum, if the board could take a look at, or commission could take a look at this, we can put it together, a response for the ZBA. However, my concern either way is that there's a few bits of language, if we're going to keep this the way that it is, that I think we need to tighten up in the event that my decision's appealed, just to, some loose ends that all of a sudden they're being challenged, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, I, for one, in terms of the communication from ZBA and looking at our regulations, for the 20+ years that we've had this as part of our zoning regulations, it has worked. I think that we need to tighten it up, do some clarifications, and keep it the way it is. I think, obviously a rooftop deck is of interest when you have a view, whatever that view is, mountains, water, whatever, but they're typically gonna be in a area where you could tower over the house next to you and be looking down into someone else's property, and I think that has to seriously be considered when you look at that. I mean, I wouldn't want that to happen to me. I wouldn't want to do it to another neighbor, but I would agree that a deck is not an architectural design.
And just to point out too, the applications for variance that the ZBA is seeing, they're not in Otter Cove or somewhere with very large lots. They're in beach communities on 4,000 or 5,000 square foot lots, with houses that are being torn down, many of them, to meet flood compliance. So they have to maximize the height, and most of them obviously have nice water views. If they're higher, it would be a great place to hang out on the 4th of July, some of these places. But to watch fireworks or watch boats come in, whatever, but it's not really, it's more of an issue of smaller non-conforming lots, and that's why
Right.
ZBA is seeing them.
Anybody else wanna comment at this time?
So the ZBA's recommendation for wording is,
No, so the ZBA, in their meeting, they had a lot of discussion, and there was some talk that they think you should reconsider. They think you should consider allowing rooftop deck. They think you should consider allowing for rooftop decks.
Right. And then-
So amending the regulations to allow rooftop decks. So you'll have a house with a flat roof with a rooftop deck off of a half story. Potentially. So when I met with the ZBA, they had all kinds of ideas as to how the regulation could be amended. And well, the zoning commission could go through and have it, you can't have a rooftop deck that, is higher than 20 feet from the ground, or you can't have this, or in a number of different things. And I said to the zoning board of appeals, politely, I said, well, your job is to vary the zoning regulations. You're looking to rewrite the zoning regulations, and that's really not a function. It is not a function of the zoning board of appeals. And they've disagreed with my interpretation, which has been supported by this board as well. And I think that they're looking, number one, my perspective, we need to clarify a few loose ends to keep it the way it is. But they're looking for this board to reconsider rooftop decks off of half stories and to allow them because they feel they're an attractive feature. Particularly, in areas where you can gain views, people come here to have views. And that's their perspective. So this is really a request for you to take a look at the regulations for rooftop decks and to go through and consider amending your regulations. This possible regulation fixes for rooftop decks. I started working on this in August, just kind of some ideas. And then in certain circumstances, and I know, covered decks or balconies, kind of trying to clarify, it needs a lot of work, but these are really all the sections of the regulation. So that talk about rooftop decks, because it's not as though we have a section that says rooftop deck allowed or not allowed, or hot tub not allowed. So if you really go through and you dissect the definition of half story, and a half story has to be 50% of the area or less of the story below. But when you have a 2.5 story, this is where it starts getting a little bit tricky. And that's really, I think, the goal here is people are looking for more 2.5 story homes with decks on them. And then you also need to take into consideration with these that when you have a house that's flood compliant with a garage underneath, that area below isn't considered a story. So it really could end up being the area of flood compliance with the first floor that looks like a second floor, with the second floor that looks like a third floor with a half story, but you really can't put a half story in some circumstances, depending on how high it is. So then you may just want a flat rooftop deck rather than have a peaked roof. And that's another thing that's not addressed, is allowing for flat rooftop decks over a second story. And that's something else we need to, I understand it, but apparently we need to clarify.
Any other comments, Brenda?
I think from the CBA's perspective, they really do move the direction of more language so that they can better explain and justify when they're giving a denial or not approving something. So I think he would assist them in the process if we add more language to it.
Well, it's not giving them more assistance, it's, they don't like the regulation.
But I don't think we can change the regulation.
Okay.
We better.
Well, that would be more for me to strengthen my argument,
Right.
because the ZBA, some of the members disagree with my interpretation. And I would need that support from the zoning commission and the change, because I'm the one who'd end up in front of them with
Right.
the appeal.
Mark, any comment?
Particularly, I like it the way it is.
A little clarification maybe to
Okay.
Yeah,
with that. Bob, you have, some insight? You're muted.
Yeah. I wrote to Chris that my impression of a deck does not include a deck on top of another portion of the building, like living space.
Right.
Even Saybrook Point Inn's deck on top of garages, to me, that's not a deck. That's I don't know what to call it, but regulations, and I had that in the motion as a stipulation that the deck should be open to the sky, basically, and nothing but retractable awning and no enclosures. And so that's one part of my conception of a deck. The other part is that what we're talking about from the ZBA is that a deck overlooking a neighbor's yard is a real impingement on their privacy and the use of their own property at ground level if there's people above looking down on a next door neighbor's yard. And so if there's space from the building to the property line to put a deck, that's one thing. But to put a deck on top of the roof, to me, is that's for somewhere else. And that in Old Saybrook, a deck on top of living space is it's not a widow's walk. It's not anything that suits the enjoyment of the property surrounding if it's overlooking the property. And so I don't know how you do it. Either say not allowed at all, or that it has to be a certain distance from a property line in order to have a rooftop deck. That's about where I am. There is a house on Great Hammock heading from Old Post Road to Town Beach. It's like it's the last house before wetlands, and it has an outdoor staircase to a rooftop deck. And in that case, it appears to work. But that's a unique case. I don't think it would work in most other places. So
in that case, it's really over the first story. You know what I'm saying? So you have your first story and then you have your deck, if I remember correctly. And then it has that spiral staircase. Right. So it's really when you start getting with that half story, I think it's really when you have a 2.5 story house or a flood compliant house that has that appearance that it's higher, and then having it when they're over a certain square footage. But that's.
There's another one over by Norwood, the distance border Norwood and the water side. It's like a spiral staircase that goes up.
Yeah.
The deck over a second floor. Almost the third floor. It's way up there.
And I mean, I think that's what we need to clarify.
Right.
We don't want decks over second floors. You know, and then there was some discussion at the ZBA meeting saying, well, you know, that means you're not allowing for flat roofs. Which, I mean, it's really not a flat roof, it's a roof with it's a flat, how can you say? It's a second story with a deck above it, it's really not a flat roof anymore.
Right.
And there are situations, and there was one that went to the ZBA where the folks had a two-story house with a rooftop deck, but it wasn't off of a half story. When they put an addition over their garage, they wanted to keep the deck that they had. And it ended up, and I'll kind of just, they started out. Just gonna do a little drawing for you. Joanne can correct me, because I think we were at this here. I was. It's kind of hard to see, but it started out, and I'll put it closer for Bob, that they had a house, a 2.5 story house with a garage, and it looks like there was no permits for the deck. It looks like they had a flat roof garage and put railing on it. And then at some point a door went through, but that would be allowed.
Some point of door.
So then they wanted a variance to go through and put a bedroom or whatever it was above, and then
Move
move
the deck up.
the deck up. But then you end up in that half-story situation, and I don't know, where's the best way? I don't know if Bob can see this, how it changed. But most of the things, and I mean, I understand Bob's point about setbacks. But the reality of it is, the reason people are going for variances, it's not just for a rooftop deck, it's my house is 5 feet from the line and I'm gonna put an addition onto my house and I want a rooftop deck on top of that. So there's situations where it's so close to the line. And then you have the neighbor in the non-conforming little 1-story bungalow that they're non-conforming and right up to the line where you have, you know, maybe 10 feet or 15 feet between the two houses, never mind this huge height. But anyway, that's.
So does the commission, I sense the commission is in agreement that we keep the regulation with an eye towards some clarification and strengthening of the current regulation. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Okay. Does that,
And then the response to the ZBA is that you want to keep the regulation. You don't want to revisit the regulation since you feel, I mean, some of the things that, are we writing a memo back saying that it kind of infringes on people's privacy, most of the folks who are going in?
yeah, we should reply in a written format since they.
Do you want me to draft something kind of based on the discussion tonight and then
If you have the
either
time
run
to
it
do that.
through Mark or bring it back next week? Sure, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Plenty of time,
Plenty of time.
plenty of,
And,
I'll get my phone on.
yes,
All right, we'll draft something
Okay.
up.
and do we, to make any updates or clarification, do we have to have a workshop?
I think we can probably go through and just, at some point, what I would like to do is we do have a few housekeeping regulations that need to be amended. There was, we talked about them, a few of them here and there, you know how I bring them up. One of them was that there's a conflict with one of our regulations and a change in statute. Just, you know, some odds and ends that we found, just like this one.
Okay.
So I can put that together. I guess my concern right now is trying to get through drive-throughs and not
Right.
throwing another workshop in the mix,
Right.
not to,
Okay. We don't have to,
but I could, you know, add that.
we don't have to do it. If we don't have to do it, that's fine.
Oh, there.
A workshop. Yeah, easy.
Well, I just put some text together
Yeah, get that together.
and then we'll add it into the regulation fixes and we'll go from there.
Yep.
And I think that's it, unless you really have anything for me.
I don't have anything.
Motion to adjourn.
Anyone else? Mark made a motion to adjourn. Is there a second by John Henry? All in favor?
Right.
Aye, opposed, abstentions? Thank you very much.